a small word of apology for the disruption in the last couple of weeks. So it's entirely due to my having been away from Trivandrum. But I thank you for your continued keen interest in the various facets of the theme that we are trying to decipher. Our overall theme, just to remind ourselves, is the difference between spirituality and religion. And I hope that by the time we finish this interaction, which should happen in the next 3 to 4 months, we would have attained some degree of clarity on the fundamental concepts. Because I believe that one of the basic needs in our spiritual life is the need for clarity. We cannot afford to stay confused. I suppose confusion is the language of the very devil. If we associate spirituality with light, one symbolic connotation of light is clarity. Clarity. So it should be our endeavor to cultivate clarity, especially on central or fundamental aspects of a discipline that we have voluntarily chosen for ourselves, which is spirituality. And that is actually the overall purpose of this course. And I thank you for your interest. And I must also very quickly welcome my good friend Banerjee Yeshudasan from Vellore. Thank you, Banerjee. Now, today I'm going to bring to your notice a very disturbing event. Those who are based in Kerala certainly would be familiar with all the details, but since this group includes those who are outside Kerala, some of you may not be aware of this. Something that is reportedly similar to or close to human sacrifice happened in a place called Ilanthur in Pathanamthitta, Kerala. How many of you are aware of this? Human sacrifice? Yes, of course, Rachan would be aware. Now, when this was reported, I was both surprised and not surprised, because certainly it's not the first time it's happening in Kerala. Secondly, I don't really attach much significance to labels like, Navothana Kerala of Great Renaissance, etc., or the great track record Kerala has in education, and the cosmopolitan culture in Kerala, so on and so forth. The many strengths that we are used to flaunting when we discuss Kerala in relation to other states. All this is rhetoric. The ground reality is very different. And events like this that erupt from time to time call us to sit up and take note as to where we are. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this event into the ambit of our discussion is that in terms of what is reported yet, and I'm afraid far more disturbing details will emerge soon, this event smacks of religiosity. After all, sacrifice is a religious concept. Human sacrifice. Not long ago in human history, human sacrifice was practiced, and human sacrifice is practiced in India even today. Various reports keep coming to light from time to time. So I thought it would be a good context for us to discuss the place of superstition in religion and superstition. right? And I do so particularly in light of the fact that when this event came to light, a demand also emerged that the government legislate a law to eradicate superstition from religious practices. This suggestion itself is nothing new. It emerged at least 9 years ago. Two governments have taken note of it, but not a single step has been taken in this direction, which itself is a very significant thing, and we'll have occasion to discuss it. Now, I remember reading a book some years ago by a German philosopher, his name being Arthur Schopenhauer. The title of the book is Religion, a Dialogue. You can easily get it from the net, free. And one interesting statement that Schopenhauer makes in that book, it's not a big tome, it's about maybe 100 pages. Schopenhauer comes up with this very interesting observation or statement, if you like. He says, human beings can live without faith, but they cannot live without superstition. This is something that made me think a lot. Let me repeat. Human beings can live without faith, but they cannot live without superstition. I wonder if you agree with this. I wonder if this ever occurred to you before. I have to admit that before I read Schopenhauer, this never occurred to me. And also that ever since I read Schopenhauer, I've been mulling over this. So if you go by Schopenhauer's wisdom or observation, you will have to agree that superstition is far more universal than faith. Superstition is far more universal than faith. You know, you're familiar, I'm sure, with the exclamation that Jesus makes. You find it in the 18th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, verses 7 and 8. Jesus says, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith in this world? Okay? It's very interesting. 2,000 years ago, Jesus wonders if he would encounter faith upon this earth when he comes again. In other words, will faith survive in human beings? This concern is expressed by a person who is described by the author of the letter to Hebrews as the author and finisher or perfecter of our faith. Jesus says, will faith survive? So that's the reason why we need to take these things seriously. Now, Jesus, of course, is quite clear that superstitions will multiply. Jesus is not asking if superstitions will survive. He's asking if faith will survive. So let's keep that at the back of our mind. So when you think of this gory episode in Elanthoor, Pathanamthitta, which is actually the constituency of the health minister of Kerala, now you cannot but confront the reality of crass, cruel, criminal superstition. When people become superstitious, there is no limit to which they would go. So the issue that we are handling today is a very serious one. So a fundamental question that lurks in all this is, can human beings or do human beings love God as God? Or do we love God, or we think we love God as a tool to subserve our interests, more precisely our covetousness? By the way, if you really analyze the essence of superstition, I'm using the word in the singular to treat it as a phenomenon rather than as a handful of superstitions. Superstition as a phenomenon. If you analyze the essence of, you really look for the essence of superstition, you find that it is nothing but covetousness. Wherever human beings are greedy or covetous, they will become superstitious. Knowingly, unknowingly. In fact, covetousness shifts the foundation of human existence from faith to superstition. This is my fundamental thesis. And I believe that this is a reason why in the 10th commandment, there is a prescription against covetousness. Thou shalt not covet. Now, what is the purpose in practicing various superstitions? All superstitions are resorted to by individuals in order to secure for themselves, and underline the words that I'm going to say, in order to secure for themselves unmerited advantages and gains. You don't need any superstition to attain an advantage or a gain or a merit for which you're qualified. For example, if you recall your days in college or school or whatever, when the annual examination came, if you had worked consistently through the academic year, you did not need any superstition to go and write the exam. On the other hand, you couldn't organize yourself, you wasted your time, and on the eve of the examination, like a drowning man who clutches at any piece of straw, you will resort to any superstition. So bring a godman from this place or that place, and let him say a prayer, and then somehow, in a kind of mysterious manner, your grades will go up. This assumption is entertained by so many people. In fact, a vast majority of Christians harbor such notions. For example, how many people use the Bible superstitiously? The various manifestations of which I need not explain to you. There are people who believe that if the Bible is kept under your head when you have some illness, you'll be healed. You don't have to understand the Bible. You don't have to go by the teachings of Jesus Christ. You don't have to reform yourself. Just keep the material object like a pillow under your head and you're okay. Or there are people who believe that if certain particular texts from the Bible, considered to be auspicious texts, are read on certain occasions, then all shall be well. Much like the Hindus believing that if a particular god, what's that? The god with the elephant's trunk. Anyway, so if that particular god who breaks the spell of hindrances is kept pleased, then you'll have a smooth passage. So if you really create a list of the superstitions that abound in all religious communities without exception, you'll be astonished. Now, don't get me wrong when I say that a majority of Christians even participate in the Lord's Supper superstitiously. You'll be shocked that I say so. But why do I say so? We believe that simply by ingesting that small piece of wafer and a small spoonful of diluted grape juice, some kind of spiritual vitality, some kind of spiritual merit is acquired by us. On what basis? I have no idea. It is certainly not there in the teaching of Jesus Christ. Who invented this? It's for you to find out. It is a superstitious misuse of the idea of the communion. And you can take up any practice that exists. For example, How in the world can you persuade yourself to believe that if a particular prayer is said near the cemetery, the tomb of a dear one, the merit of that prayer will go to the departed one somewhere, either in purgatory or in heaven or wherever? I know that this is not practiced by all denominations, but the denominations where such things are taken very seriously. Or for that matter, the idea that if you keep certain saints pleased, like Saint Anthony, will take care of your travel along the road. So bus conductors and drivers, Christian bus conductors and drivers, are particularly keen to be in the good books of Saint Anthony. Saint George, with his sphere and martial valor, is a protector. So on all kinds of things. Or think of the prosperity gospel. I'll come to that in a short while. Is there anything in the prosperity gospel which is not superstitious? Any aspect, an iota. The prosperity gospel is compacted entirely of superstitions. I'm willing to discuss details with you if you're interested. You can raise questions. It's important that we have the guts to face the reality. I know this is not fashionable, but I also believe that it doesn't help to keep our heads buried under the sand of either self-delusion or the denial of realities. So, all religious practices can be used superstitiously. Now, let us understand this, because to me this is a very key idea. Therefore, I need to explain this to you. The first thing I want to say is this, that you cannot create a religion out of anything which cannot be misinterpreted. Has it ever occurred to you? I'll explain why. You cannot include in the bracket of religion anything which cannot be misinterpreted. For example, you cannot create a religion out of 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Or a plus b the whole square is equal to a square plus b, 2ab plus b square. Or water boils at 100 degrees centigrade at sea level. Or whatever. Whatever cannot be misinterpreted cannot become part of religion. Do you know this? There's a reason for it. The reason is the material of which religion is compacted or religion is made belongs to our inner life. And whatever belongs to our inner life cannot be subjected to empirical or scientific verification. Now, Rachan is a scientist. In the world of science, subjective convictions cannot hold good. You can't say that, it's my faith. I'm a Christian. Faith is my particular strength. So as per my faith, water boils at 98 degrees centigrade. You cannot do that. Dr. Zach is a doctor. He cannot say that I'm a Christian. My strength is, so is Jacob Kurian. I believe that this particular drug, which is proscribed by the Drug Control Organization in some other countries, will do enormous good. It's my faith. You can't do that. Whereas, take anything, any aspect, any article of faith, any practice, any custom, any tradition, any ritual, any provision that forms part of religion, you will see that it can be misinterpreted and abused. Now, it is because of this that a very special duty devolves on each one of us. And what is that duty? And that duty was identified by Jesus Christ. I don't have to do it. So Jesus said, be vigilant and pray. Right? Be vigilant and pray. Why is there the need for vigilance? Hmm? Why the need for vigilance? Vigilance is required because, or side by side with this, also realize that discernment is one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, right? So vigilance and discernment, all these things are important in the domain of religion because every aspect of religion can be distorted, misinterpreted, abused. And when I say abused, I certainly mean to say used in a superstitious manner. And when I say superstitious manner, as I've already indicated, the motive is covetousness. Now, it's interesting that there is a collaboration of covetousness between the believer and the priest. When I say these things, don't think that I have something against priests. That's not the idea. There is a collusion, there is a collaboration of interests between the two parties. After all, we all live in this world together, we understand each other. No priest can survive without catering to the dominant interests of the people he is supposed to look after. That is why, in the biblical tradition, particularly in the New Testament, there's a clear-cut distinction between the priest and the prophet. What's the difference between the priest and the prophet? You will never see a prophet who indulges the angularities and singularities of the people. A prophet is one who speaks the unvarnished truth to the people. That's also the reason why no prophet is accepted among his own people. You remember how Jesus wept over Jerusalem and said, you who stoned the prophets who are sent to you. You don't have an instance of a priest who is ever stoned to death. Only prophets are stoned to death. Why? Because from time immemorial, priests in all religions, without exception, developed this art of negotiating popular expectations and tastes. And therefore, in the priestly mode of religiosity, it's inevitable that there is a substantial presence of superstitions. Almost all priestly practices are redolent of or smack of superstition. Now, this may surprise us because we are used to seeing all these things from the time of our birth, and therefore, we cannot really think that there is something wrong with all this. But if you really were to acquire the perspective of Jesus Christ, use that as the standard of judgment, then it cannot but be that you feel uncomfortable about it. After all, we have the evidence of the 4 Gospels before us. Why is it that there is no priestly presence either in the nativity story, that is a story of the birth of Jesus Christ, or in the public ministry of Jesus Christ, or among the 12, or among the Acts of the Apostles? The priestly element is conspicuously absent. There must be some logic to this. So, all religious practices, ideas, articles of belief, etc., are liable to be twisted in a superstitious manner. I need to say something more about this on the positive side. Now, suppose you create a religion made entirely out of scientific principles or objective truth. Now, when you say objective truths always comprise what is already given. You understand? You remember in the previous discussions, I said that the purpose of religion is also to connect us to the unknown, the unmanifest. That is why I've always emphasized in my writings as well as in my sermons that the most spiritual use of religion is to use it as a catalyst for human growth. You may make significant contributions to human welfare through science and technology. But you cannot make the slightest contribution via science and technology to the growth of the human person. A human being as a human being cannot be developed with the resources of science and technology. And as far as technology is concerned, it is now universally agreed that technology enslaves human beings. That's a subject in itself. Let me not lose my track. So, if human beings are to grow inwardly, grow as human beings, then we need the kind of material which is not entirely objective. And such material is to be found, shall we say, deep in the psyche of a human being. Actually, each one of us, each one of you carries a religion within you, except that you don't know this. We have never bothered to meditate. We have never bothered to seek. We have never bothered to understand ourselves, the great universe that's within us. So the purpose of religion is actually to generate that kind of material which can enter a human being and from within the human person work out this miracle of human transformation. Transformation is nothing but a glorified term for human growth towards perfection. Transformation. And the idea of transformation is absent in science and technology. It is a spiritual concept, and everything that is spiritual actually works from within. And therefore, when we create a body of thought or a system of practices of this kind, namely that which pertains to the inner universe of human beings, everything that is created becomes vulnerable to misinterpretation because there is no objective standard by which to judge it. For example, suppose somebody says to you, I speak in tongues because I want to talk to God. Now, you may hold the view, and I certainly hold the view, that God is not bound by a particular language, including the kind of language that people speaking in other tongues speak, if at all that's language. But how in the world am I to prove that the claim of this person that in order to speak to God, he needs to speak in other tongues is wrong? How am I to prove that he is wrong? I cannot prove. I can only accept his claim or I can reject the claim, but I can't prove it or disprove it. Nor can he prove it, nor can he disprove me or prove me wrong. It is for this reason that anything will pass in the domain of religion. There's a very huge aspect of religiosity about which we need to attain some clarity. The reason why all kinds of opinions flourish in the domain of religion is precisely this, that there is absolutely no objective standard by which to judge any claim made in the context of religion. So, it is easy, therefore, to understand that religion accommodates a very large margin for superstition. In fact, I go a step further and say that every element in religion can be misinterpreted and misused in a superstitious manner. If you want, we can discuss it later. So, now, every human being has a need to relate to the world. In fact, if you remember in the first session of the first course, I said the religion is about our relationship to God, to the world, and to the unmanifest. So every human being needs to relate to the world. After all, we exist in this world. We can't pretend that we don't live in this world. I mean, philosophically, it is said that, we are on the earth, but not of the earth. But what actually it means in practical terms, nobody will tell you. So we have to relate to the world. Now, there are two ways of relating to the world. One is via faith, the other is via superstition. Most people readily accept the path of superstition, not just in religion. There are the secular superstitions, there are scientific superstitions, there are political, there are cultural superstitions. For example, when Prime Minister Modi, he was not Prime Minister at that time, said that if he is elected to power, he would make every Indian richer by 15 lakh rupees overnight. The whole of India believed it. That's superstition. Do you really believe a Prime Minister can make you richer overnight by 15 lakhs? In which world are you living? Do you really believe that a Prime Minister would want to bring all the black money stashed away in foreign countries into this country? If there was a political will to do that, so much money would not have fled from India in the first place. So the superstitious attitude works in so many ways. For example, today, Indians have to blindly believe everything that the Prime Minister says. If you offer the slightest criticism, express dissent, then you become an anti-national element. So in the domain of politics, we have to be superstitious, so on and so forth. So the external world confronts every human being with challenges, resistances, and difficulties. There is no human being who is hermetically sealed from the challenges, the rubs, the arrows, the slings, as Shakespeare says, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Okay? We all have to endure the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Where does it come? Or where do they come from? They come from the world, right? So how do we actually face this? This is a fundamental issue. We can't wish them away. They are there. We have to face them. So the self has to face this reality, and the only question is, how do we face it? There are only two ways of doing this. One is by taking the help of external forces. For example, if you become unwell, you take the help of a good doctor. Or somebody threatens you. You go to your local MLA and say, "My Bap, please protect me." I don't know who will protect you from your MLA, that's a different issue, but when a street that threatens you, you may go to your MLA if he's available. Or somebody snatches your property, you go to a court of law. These are all external sources. So when you face challenges in the world, one way of dealing with this is by taking help from external sources, by depending on external provisions, resources, equations, institutions, etc. The other is by means of one's own resources. Unfortunately, because our nurture is mostly secular and worldly, when we face the actual realities of life, it occurs to us only to take help from external sources, not from our internal resources. Faith is that internal resource. Now, if you look at superstitions, what happens? Superstitions always arise when religious expectations are foisted on external agencies. Say, if you're a Hindu, you'll go to a Mandravadi, a practitioner of black magic. If you're a Christian, you'll go to a God man. If you're so inclined, you might go to an ascetic or a seer or whatever, some external source. Now, the great spiritual revolution that Jesus introduced, of which very little is spoken in our midst, is that Jesus implicitly, without making too much noise about it, and that's the beauty of the way of Jesus Christ. He doesn't confront you with a rhetorical flourish. He just very quietly, nicely introduces it. You look at the teachings of Jesus Christ from start to finish, I can tell you without exception. Jesus is exhorting people, Jesus is challenging people, Jesus is training people to depend more and more on themselves. Your faith has healed you, your faith has healed you, your faith has healed you. Think of the parable of the talents. What is it that makes the difference? Some external resource or internal resource? Think of the parable of the 10 maidens. 5 of them with lamp without oil, 5 lamps with oil. What is it that makes the absolute difference? The internal condition. You take anything that Jesus has taught. I challenge you. There is absolutely no suggestion anywhere in the teachings of Jesus Christ that you need to depend on somebody external to yourself. Well, then you would ask me, what about that instance in which Jesus heals a leper and asks him to go and show himself to the priest? Now, that event is a sarcastic one. Again, I'm not going to discuss that in detail now. We can discuss it, if you like, at the time of the interactions. So let's be clear about this. All of us have challenges and problems to face. There are 2 ways of doing this: by going and depending on external resources, agencies, including church, priests, bishops, etc. Let me ask you a question. The priest is also a human being. He has his cross to bear. Do you think he can carry your burden? Have you ever come across a human being on planet Earth who can carry your burden? Or for that matter, please ask yourself, why should somebody else carry my burden? After all, it's my burden, right? And why is that burden given to me? That burden is given to me much like the discipline that an athlete practices or maintains of practicing himself so that he keeps himself in fine shape. Every resistance, every problem, every challenge, every crisis has its place in our spiritual life, in the plan of God. Why should we dump that on somebody else? And this whole idea that you develop some problem, immediately run to somebody, bring that Devadasan, he will pray and deliver you, it is bunkum. It is completely contrary to the teachings of Jesus Christ. I'm not saying that people should not pray for you. What I'm saying is that God has to be an unlettered kind of an unwise person to let these things happen in your life without a purpose. Surely I can say this about my life. Whatever terrible things happen in my life, the terrible struggles that I've had to go through, and even the turbulence that I live through today, I praise God for them, because that's the only way I could have grown and developed. If at all I have, there's no other way. So, any attempt to pass off your burden to somebody else, or any attempt to secure some kind of undeserved fortune, benefit, profit, prosperity, relief through some external agency is inherently superstitious. Inherently superstitious. Please think about it. All right. The moment we therefore choose to depend on external sources, for example, the middleman, the miracle worker, etc., what happens? We put ourselves in a state of vulnerability to external manipulation. Rest assured of one thing: depend on any human being, even a saint, you will be manipulated. The extent of your manipulation will vary, but you will be manipulated. Any dependence on anything external to you. And the most surprising thing, and this is why I respect Jesus Christ to the high heavens, you know what he said to his disciples? It is good for you that I go, right? Have you ever come across a priest or a bishop who ever says this, or who has ever said this to anyone? It's good for you that I go. Would anyone say this? No. Now, that is because Jesus, according to the spiritual vision of Jesus Christ, no form of dependence is good for the welfare of a human being, period. So, you cannot put yourself in this kind of state and then complain that you have been manipulated, taken for a ride, exploited, made a fool of, etc., because you asked for it. Now, this is for this reason. It is for this reason, my friends, that the number of people who have been cheated by Christian godmen in Kerala would run into thousands, tens and thousands. And over the last at least 40 years, how many of them would come out in the open and say that I've been cheated? Not even 0.01%. No one would want to say that in public. Because in retrospect, they realized that they were foolish. And no one wants to be seen a fool in public. And this is also why this religious charlatanism, this huge swindle, this treachery, this deception, this exploitation and manipulation thrive in our midst, because the real victims always sit in a corner and lick their wounds. They never talk about it with anyone. On the other hand, if accidentally somebody had a healing, that is then, trumpeted, tom-tomed, huge publicity, barrage of publicity. And the whole state is turned upside down, right? And you must actually, if you're interested, you must study the role that the media has played, especially the electronic media channels have played in promoting Christian godmen. Other godmen as well, but that's not my concern at the moment. Why is it that so many people in Kerala who know how to make a mega buck out of people's vulnerability buy airtime on mainstream television channels? Because it's hugely lucrative. And how exactly this works and the dynamics of it, I'm sure you're aware of that. So now I said at the beginning at times, I said that we need to be particularly mindful of the deception packaged as the prosperity gospel. You see, think of it, my dear friends. Jesus, who said that the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, in his name, prosperity gospel is preached. It's become a mega industry. How many people in Kerala have become millionaires selling the poverty of Jesus? Look at the Christian godmen, Benny Down, globally. How many of them? So, now some of the fundamental assumptions, the creed of the prosperity gospel, what are the assumptions that drive this aberration called the prosperity gospel? If you give to God, God will return it multiplied 15 times, right? It's a good lottery, my friends, right? See, in a lottery, it's better than lottery, because in a lottery only 1 or 2 people, or maybe 5, 6 people win something. But here everybody wins. You put 100 rupees, you get 150 rupees. Good bargain. So this is immediately lapped up. People actually believe this. Or for that matter, all of us, we are all told that through our baptism, we are dead to sins, right? Anyone who has not heard this? If that is the case, my dear friends, let me ask you, what is the need for forgiveness of sins thereafter? If you're dead to sins, will we ever sin thereafter? What is the need to confess? What's the need for absolution? You can't have a situation in which you're dead to sins, but you continue to sin. But no one will ask that question. My dear priest, please explain to me. I died to sin through baptism, the baptism that you administered to me, but I find myself horribly vulnerable to sin. Please explain this to me. Would anyone ever ask? No. And on that reality, another ritual is erected, namely this confession. You have to go and confess to the priest, one to one. And what all things happen in the name of confessions, you're aware of. Or for that matter, take this idea that because the priest says some written prayer over wafer and wine, the two items actually turn into the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Let me tell you, if you can believe that, you can believe anything under the sun, including this idea that if two women are killed and their blood sprinkled here and there, you will become prosperous. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the Last Supper that Jesus Christ celebrated with his disciples is meaningless. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that if a priest claims to have the power to transform a piece of bread and a spoonful of grape juice into the body and blood of Jesus Christ, and he is believed implicitly, I find it really difficult. Well, you can say, well, it's authority of the church. That's how it is described. The authority of the church. That priest, after all, is officiating under the authority of the church, and the authority of the church is apostolic. After all, bishops are ordained under the laying on of hands of the apostles. That goes all the way back to St. Thomas as far as India is concerned, Peter as far as the Western tradition is concerned, or whatever. But think for a moment about this idea of laying on of hands. By what courtesy of consideration can you actually believe? I say this because I have experienced it. I have undergone laying on of hands when I was ordained as a priest. I can't tell you with what fervor I prepared myself for it. My Lord the Bishop placed his hand on me to pass on the apostolic succession. And I expected something, I said, at least a little bit of 0.01 voltage of electricity. It was a damn squib. So our corporate religious life as Christians is erected on all these assumptions, the truth of which we never examine. I'm not saying that they have no meanings. My only point is that nobody ever bothers to find out how it works. I'm not saying these things don't work. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that these things can't work. Because immediately whatever I say is misunderstood. I'm only saying that nobody ever bothers to ask, how does this work? Under what circumstances? In what ways? How do I know that it works or doesn't work? Let me give you an illustration. You see, in the last 5-6 months, I've been involved in a kind of debate about speaking in tongues. I did some videos and it created a lot of argument. The Pentecostals are very upset with me. Now, you think of the second chapter of Acts of the Apostles, right? Now, there's something beautiful there. I believe that episode is authentic. It is not just that the apostles began to talk in tongues and those who gathered from the four corners of the world began to hear what the apostles spoke in their own languages. That's not the only thing. There are two objective authenticating signs. There is a thunderous noise like a huge storm raging in the heavens. Second, the Spirit of God in the likeness of cloven tongues of fire rested upon the people. These two are objective realities. And do you see any such objective reality or objective sign, authenticating sign in any of the exercises in speaking in tongues after that, including in chapters 10, chapter 11, chapter 19 of Acts of the Apostles, chapter 12 of the first letter to Corinthians? Nowhere thereafter you see these signs. What you see is people speaking in tongues. They don't even communicate. Nobody communicates. Even in Acts chapter 2, speaking in tongues as a gift of the Spirit was given in order to communicate. From that time onwards, speaking in tongues is used to not communicate. Even in the Bible, please read chapters 10, chapters 11, chapters 19 of Acts of the Apostles. No communication takes place. But nobody will ever discuss these things. The moment you point out something, you're attacked. So this is what I say, that all these things are actually practiced in a superstitious manner. Whereas I find superstition conspicuously absent from the teachings and the public ministry of Jesus Christ. So, Soren Kierkegaard defined faith as a leap in faith. That is to say, you cannot actually proceed in a kind of serial logical fashion, say A to B, B to C, C to D, like that, and then come to a spiritual conclusion. Faith always involves a leap. And that is true. Because as I said at the beginning, whatever is 100% rational, whatever is 100% objective, whatever can be verified and proven to be true beyond any scope of error, cannot become part of religion. So we are caught in this kind of a situation. And it is for this reason that Jesus said in the parable on the kingdom of God, you find it in the 13th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, it says that in this world, wheat and tares grow up together. In this world, truth and falsehood coexist in an intermingling fashion. And because of that, a great spiritual duty is laid upon us to be alert, to be vigilant, and to be discerning. So, any relaxation of the spiritual duty makes us vulnerable to being absorbed in the world of superstitions. All right. Now, very quickly, I'll close it in maximum 5 minutes. Now, let us cast a very quick glance at Jesus Christ. After all, we talk about the way of Jesus Christ. John chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus says, I am the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So then we say that there's no other way except Jesus Christ. But what is that way? That we won't ask. Okay, let me very quickly give you a list without discussing or going into details, a list of the characteristics of the way of Jesus Christ. Number one, Jesus never resorted to magical solutions for his sake. That's why you have the three temptations. Jesus explicitly rejects the path of the miraculous solution in all the three temptations that Satan brings his way. It's something I've discussed on previous occasions. Let me just mention this and move on. Secondly, Jesus explicitly prohibited sensationalism and publicity. Read the 6th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. It says, let let your left hand not know what the right hand is doing. How should you pray? Get into your closet, shut the door after you, and pray to your Father who sees your heart in secret. If you're fasting, do not make a heavy weather of it. Don't advertise it on the face through its gloom. Huh? Don't go around saying, look at me, I'm fasting, look how miserable I am, how emaciated. So Jesus explicitly prohibits publicity, making a show of religion. Jesus says, why do you want to pray too much, standing in street corners? He says, these things only the Gentiles do. It is not good for you. Has this advice sunk into the Christian community in 2000 years? There are people who are experts in praying in conventions. There's a convention prayer style itself, right? And how stylized prayer has become. Okay, so there are experts, specialists. So there is a story of a traveler from UK who visited the Eastern countries, olden days. So a king received him and treated him very kindly. He stayed in the king's palace for a month. And after that, he was leaving. When he was leaving, a farewell meeting was organized, a farewell function was organized. So various things were said by the king's people. And at the end of it, this guest, the white man, got up to say a word of gratitude, a speech of gratitude. The moment he got up, the king said, no, you sit down. We have experts for that also. We have an expert who will say your speech of gratitude, because it's an expert's job in my country. You understand? So everything is expert's job. So as I said, Jesus never resorted to magical solutions. Number one, he renounced and denounced sensationalism and publicity. Number three, Jesus never escaped from the realities of life. What is the cross of Jesus Christ, which we meditate annually? What does it mean? The main message of the cross of Jesus Christ, he says, there is no escape from the realities of life. You have to enter into it. You know, there are people who are specialists in flying planes into the eye of the storm. I've often wondered how they do it. But I understand that in the eye of the storm, it's relatively peaceful. But how do you dare to do that? Right? So Jesus never tried to escape from the realities of the world, the painful realities of the world. In fact, he breasted the full thrust of life. That's why he's so fascinating. Right? That's the way of Jesus Christ. You want it? Anyone wants it? And he did not hide this. He said, Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, if anyone would come after me, let him take up the cross, let him deny himself, take up the cross and follow me. That's the way of Jesus Christ. But we now turn to Jesus Christ just to escape from the realities of the world. That's why I said that everything about religion is susceptible to be misinterpreted and misused. Everything, every detail, take up, we can discuss and find out. So finally, furthermore, point number 4, the way of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was never mindful of any worldly gains. What about religiosity today? It's a quick fix, a short path to prosperity without having to sweat and shed your energy for it. And finally, the way of Jesus Christ is also distinguished by his instinctive oneness with God the Father. He says, I and my Father are one. He not only said that, but he authenticated it by the ministry that he practiced, in which he surrendered himself unconditionally and implicitly and absolutely to realizing the will of God concerning humanity upon the earth. That's the way of Jesus Christ. And you see that none of these things will accommodate even the slightest margin for superstition. Tell me where in the teachings of Jesus Christ, where in the public ministry of Jesus Christ, where in anything that he did, there is the slightest foothold, a toehold of space for superstition. And yet, in his name, a universe of superstition has been created. Well, I wanted to discuss further this proposal that has come up in Kerala, that the government should now come up with a law to proscribe superstitions. Let me conclude by simply saying that is not going to happen. It just cannot be done because there is no way, absolutely no way, and George Tharagan is a lawyer in our midst. I would like to know what he thinks about it. There is absolutely no way by which religion and superstition can be separated by law. And if at all a draft bill is produced, I can assure you that every religious leader in Kerala will come together and stiffly oppose it. Mark my words. If at all it happens, you'll remember what I've said to you this evening. There's a last thing the custodians of religion will accept. On that, I'll rest my case. We can have a little time of discussion. So, taking upon an event that has happened in our midst, an event that nobody can deny and nobody can turn away from. It's a haunting image, an event. It's become necessary for us to discuss some of these things. If I've overstated the case, please forgive me. But if there is areas of confusion or conflict or contradiction, I'm willing to offer further explanation. So let's have our time of discussion now.
Just out of curiosity, can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, in God's own country, this human sacrifice, is it trying to please God or demon?
Yeah. First of all, Kerala is not God's own country. Kerala is not a country in the first place. God has as much to do with Kerala as he has to do with Bihar or Orissa or UP or anywhere in the world. This was actually a phrase created by the tourism department of Kerala to package Kerala for overseas consumption, God's own land, God's own country. Actually, this is a phrase borrowed from the United States of America, as Jacob will tell you. Americans were fond of thinking America as God's own country, but then now they have also discarded it. Trump has taken charge of it. So now, as a matter of fact, Baboy, and that's the burden of my song today, that the more religious a people, the more superstitious they are apt to become. The rider is this: provided the religiosity that is popularized is a religiosity of covetousness, which I'm afraid is the case in an overwhelming majority of instances. How many of us can actually say with our hand on heart that our religiosity is not vitiated by exaggerated expectations of rewards? Look at or read once again the book of Job. It's a very peculiar text in the Old Testament canon. The sum and substance of the elaborate, detailed discussion spread over 42 chapters in the book of Job is just one question. Are human beings capable of disinterested love for God? Or, in the words of Satan, the question that Satan poses to God and the counsel of God is, does Job love God for naught? Naught means nothing. In other words, is Job's love for you disinterested? That is to say, not mercenary, right? Or to put it more simply, does Job love God for his own sake? That is God's own sake. It's another thing to love God for your own sake. You understand? Now, if you're loving God for your own sake, you will renounce God when evil days come upon you. As indeed the wife of Job exhorts him to do, he says, curse your God and die. See what has happened to you. So Job's wife surely thought that by being in the good books of God, they would ensure that only good things happen to them. And realizing this, Job asks her a question. If we can accept good things from God, shouldn't we accept evil things also? That's a question he asks his wife. So what I'm saying, therefore, is never be surprised that there is superstition where religion thrives. After all, what was the essence of the mission of Jesus Christ? Most people still don't realize that Jesus came to liberate people from religion, because it's only by liberating people from religion that they can be connected to God. See, the idea that God is our Father in heaven was alien to the Jews. Why? Because they are very religious. As we have discussed before, for them, God was a mighty warrior and all the rest of it. But never Father in heaven. Never. So this sense of intimacy with God is not allowed in religion as religion. Okay? And therefore, in religion, God is remembered, God is related to, God is invoked, God is kept appeased for mercenary reasons. Now, these mercenary reasons may also look very otherworldly, like, inheriting heaven. See, whether you are being rewarded now or after your death, it is reward, right? Every reward is an expectation for an investment that you have made, which means that your love for God is not an end in itself. It's not pure, it's mercenary. Okay? So therefore, superstition is inevitable, absolutely inevitable in the domain of religion. I say this with all the responsibility that I'm capable of. I have investigated this for years together, and I'm totally convinced about it. If you are religious, you will be superstitious. Now, it may well be the case that your superstition is a little more sophisticated, whereas a superstition of somebody else may be a bit cruder, but superstitious you are, without a doubt.
Thank you. Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Rachan, yes.
How do you relate this to the absolute, at least he calls himself the absolute rationalist or the atheist, who says that even believing in Jesus Christ who rose from the dead is a superstition?
Yes. Now, as you remember, the statement I made is that everything in religion can be used superstitiously. For example, take this idea of resurrection. What does it mean to use the idea of resurrection or the reality of resurrection in a spiritual manner? If you're relating to it spiritually, it means that this plays a very important part in defining your attitude to life, attitude to yourself, your culture, your expectations, your vision, your sense of godliness, etc. But if you're invoking the resurrection of Jesus Christ only to, shall we say, mitigate your sense of terror about death, if that's your only interest, then you're using it superstitiously. That is to say, the resurrection of Jesus Christ has no practical or spiritual influence on the quality of my life, the kind of person that I am. I have only one use for it, and that is I now experience an unmanning fear of death, death which is recognized universally as the ultimate terror. Okay? Now, for example, if you are in a state of terror, you can either drug yourself into unconsciousness and abolish that fear. The other alternative is to use this kind of an idea that Jesus Christ resurrected, therefore I also will resurrect. Now, Jesus Christ resurrected for a reason, and that is the substance of his life was immortal. You and I do not bother to make the substance of our life immortal, and then we say, well, Jesus Christ resurrected, therefore I also will resurrect. Now, I find it very hard to accept that logic. You understand? So, one thing that happens in religion, I'm glad you reminded me of this. One thing that happens in religion is that the external trappings are taken and the internal reality is denied. Now, there is the story of the black cat in an abbey, a place where celibate priests live together in prayer and all that. Now the chief abbot was fond of a black cat. So in an abbey, you have to say prayer 5 times. That's called the 5 offices of abbey life. So this cat would come and purr and make noise and walk around and distract people. So at the beginning of prayer each time, the abbot will catch this black cat and tie it to a place. So that was the opening ritual. It became the opening ritual of the prayer. So after some time, the abbot died. So by then this had become a settled practice. So people continued the practice of tying down the black cat in order to say the prayer. Because how can you say the prayer without completing the ritual of tying the cat up? After some time, this black cat died. There was a crisis. How can you say the prayer without tying a black cat? Now there is no black cat, so they have to go and get a black cat. So what has happened in this process is something external is retained. The inner idea, which is that the cat should not distract the experience of prayer, that is forgotten. The practice of tying down the cat is retained. The purpose of prayer is forgotten. This often happens in religion. Okay? So, yes, rationalists can always say that this cannot lend itself to ready belief, or it cannot be accepted because scientific evidence is against it. We are not rationalists. Thank God we are not rationalists. I'm not saying that reason has to be despised, but a rationalist does not always function on the basis of reason. Because to be rational is also to be reasonable. And if you're reasonable about your rationality, then you'll realize that your rationality can comprehend only a small aspect of life, a small chunk of life. It cannot comprehend the whole of life. So you'll always leave a margin for what human reason has not yet found, not yet mastered. And that's why I said that one of the fundamental needs of human beings is to relate to the not yet, or the unmanifest, or the what is yet to come, right? So yes, rationalists will take that view. You and I don't have to take that view. But if you sort of make much of the resurrection of Jesus Christ without accepting all that has gone into it, then it's a superstitious invocation of the idea of resurrection. That's my argument. You may disagree with it, but I'm very, very convinced that this is the case. How does it help you to say that Jesus resurrected? If, as Jesus says, you don't abide in me and I in you, right? So it's like saying, Gandhi was shot and he became the father of the nation. Let me also be shot and I'll become the father of Perukada. Huh? I don't deserve it one bit. The external fact in respect of one particular factum is the same, namely that both are shot. But the bullet, the chest that the bullet pierced in the case of Gandhi was very different from the chest in Perukada. Understand? So that's the point I'm making. All right. Any other? Rachin, do you have any further question on this? Follow-up question on this? Okay. Anything else? Good. So in that case, we can conclude our session for today. Or is there a question forming itself in the mind of George? George Tharagan.
Thank you, Achan. Not much. No, the time is offshoot. Otherwise, I would have presented something. I came a bit late. I had some other engagement. Sorry about it. But I was hopefully, earnestly, sincerely, prayerfully looking forward to this evening to hear you after a gap of 3 long weeks.
Yeah,
Thank God
actually,
you considered a very vital and current
Yeah.
issue.
yeah.
That is fine.
As I realize that the threshold of endurance for my friends improves if I speak once a month, right? Weekly sessions are far too much for flesh and blood can bear, right?
But we would like not to be tested indefinitely like that.
Okay.
But Achan, as you just indicated, a piece of legislation by the state government is not going to be purposeful or useful or creative. It will serve nothing, just some popularity about it, nothing. It's just powder, putting powder in your eyes, nothing. From a juristical point of view, no legislation can ever reform a society.
Absolutely. I fully agree.
Legislation only can give a punishment, that is all. More than that, there is no refining process at all, even though one of the intentions of giving punishment, corpus punishment, is a reformation. The person is put in jail and given him some isolated time, probably he might reform. This is one of the several reasons for granting. But it has never been a refining experience at all. There were some of the prisoners who love to go back to the prison and live. And there are some people who come from prison, but then do the same crime more grievously, more heinous, like this Shafi now. He was already for several years.
George, not only that, actually, the case against
kind of legislation is are all useless.
The case against legislation in this matter is very strong for the reason that, at least in theory, religion belongs to the private domain of life. And it is universally agreed that law must hold its horses and not jump into the enterprise of regulating the private life of citizens. That's one thing. The second aspect of the issue here is
Jacob Kurian has something to say. Jacob Kurian was
Jacob, yes.
I don't know the details or the background to this story, but has this happened before in a religious or secular arrangement?
Yes. It has happened. It has happened several times before in Kerala as well as in other states also. Sacrificing human beings is associated with some kind of very rare potency.
I see.
To compel the will of God to part with, gigantic blessings for you. For example, you see, all of us can experience, and we do experience, greater repugnance to killing a fellow human being as compared to killing an animal, right? Now, this repugnance, when it is transferred into religion, works the opposite way. It becomes potency. For example, offering vegetable sacrifices is considered inferior to offering animal sacrifices. All right?
Yeah.
Now, offering animal sacrifices must be inferior to offering human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because of the emotional factor. After all, in the Bible, there is at least one instance where human sacrifice comes to, two that we are readily familiar with. One is, one of the judges, when he wins the, I forget his name offhand. I mean, he pardon?
Barnabas, the prisoner to be released.
No. Okay. He says to God, look, if I win this battle, I'll sacrifice to you the first person I meet on reaching home. And he meets his daughter and he offers her in sacrifice. But prior to that, of course, we're familiar with the intended sacrifice of Isaac.
Yeah.
God asks Abraham to offer his son on Mount Moriah. And Kierkegaard writes an entire book on this. It's titled Fear and Trembling. A very interesting analysis of that episode. And the issue that Kierkegaard raises there is, among other things, the main issue is this: how in the world could Abraham be sure that he heard the voice of God and not the voice of Satan? Can God ask a human being to sacrifice his son? So that's why
Actually,
that's why he gives
because-
it. Yeah, that's why he gives the title to his book, Fear and Trembling.
Yeah.
Fear and Trembling. Anyway.
But coming to the today's world, if killing somebody is murder,
Yeah.
okay, and it's widely accepted in all other
Yes.
all other penal systems and judicial systems,
Yeah.
and whether it is a killing for a religious purpose
Yes.
or whatever, I think this legislation would be useful here, because you are now bringing it out in the open, saying if somebody for whatever purpose kills someone, there is a price to pay, and that would set an example so that people will not do this again if it has happened before.
Yeah.
Taking life in any form by anyone is a criminal act.
Yeah, actually, for that you don't need a specific piece of legislation, because this can be covered under existing IPC provisions. There are clear-cut and adequate rules to deal with murder. But the legislation that is now being talked about is a legislation specifically meant to eradicate superstition from religion. That's what I'm saying is not possible. And George agrees with me. George agrees with me. So, I mean, how are we to decide where the line of distinction must be drawn? Because what is superstition for me may be faith or an essential religious practice for somebody, as in the case of the hijab controversy that's raging in India at the moment. See, these are all very relative judgments. A Muslim person is quite entitled to thinking that without hijab, if a Muslim girl appears in public, then it's a great religious offense. Now, he may be passionately convinced about it. You and I may not be convinced about it. I certainly am not convinced. But who am I to say what a Muslim should believe or should not believe? So that's why I say, once we agree in general terms that articles of belief belong to the private domain of life, it is beyond the reach of legislation. It's a dangerous thing to agree that items of one's personal and private life can be regulated by the state through legislation. It's a very dangerous thing. That's why I feel that no legislation is possible in this matter. Therefore, the only way out is to raise awareness about such practices and to have a systematic program of spiritual education, not just for schools and colleges, but for the public at large. In fact, I wish there could be an organized program to raise awareness through all the churches. It would be a very significant initiative to undertake. I don't understand why these things are not thought of. So, but certainly some work has to happen. And that's also the reason why I thought of addressing this through our course, though it is not directly in the line of the main thrust of the course, just to underline the fact that all of us have a responsibility in doing what little we can to stem this rot.
Yeah.
Because after all, superstition is harmful to humanity. There's no doubt about it. Superstition makes people irrational. Superstition enfeebles the ethical temperament of human beings. Superstition stands in the way of human growth and development. And above all, as I said repeatedly, superstitions make human beings vulnerable to large-scale manipulation and exploitation. all of which are repugnant. And there should be no margin left for it. But the way forward is not legislation. It is through the spiritual education and enlightenment of a people. In fact, that was the essence of the Reformation movement. After all, when Martin Luther launched this movement, he was mainly targeting the superstitions that abounded in the Roman Catholic Church. And see how ferociously the church defended and protected its right to perpetuate superstitions. Because all profit accrue from superstitions. Remove superstitions, I can assure you, there'll be absolutely no profit. The more superstitions you have, the greater the profit. That's why the Roman Catholic Church, for example, invented the superstition that there is a place called purgatory. And if you can buy indulgences from the Pope at a huge price, then the period of suffering that your dear one will have to undergo in purgatory will be reduced. And if your payment is substantial enough, it will be entirely abolished. What more do you want? Okay? I mean, such superstitions governed the thinking of enlightened Europe. Enlightened Europe. Just imagine. All right. So on that, we close. Now, all that I wanted to emphasize repeatedly is this, that the distance between religion and superstition is wafer thin. Though we are apt to think of it contrary-wise, the fact of the matter is that there is a very large area of overlapping between religion and superstition. And when religion is organized and handed over to a priestly class, it's the superstitious elements that get enunciated. And therefore, as Jesus himself realized, looking at the plight of the people, he said they're like people without a sheep without a shepherd. The plight of the people, they're miserable, uncared for, pathetic. So that is the reality that we need to address. Okay. Thank you very much. And I look forward to getting together with you again next Saturday. And as and when this is uploaded on the YouTube, the link will be sent to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good night, Machin. Good night to you. Thank you so much, Fifi. God bless.
Thank you. Much appreciated.